Hello, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. What if the channel you've written off as brand only could measurably lift your Meta and Google performance? In this episode, tech journalist David Murphy is joined by Mike Fogarty, head of client development at Tatari, and Lauren Frame, director of growth and brand media at Greenlight, to explore how a performance-first app brand turned TV from a scary experiment into an always-on channel that now accounts for over a third of its media mix. Whether you're a growth marketer, watching CACs climb on paid social, wondering how to measure a channel without click-through attribution, or curious whether AI-produced creative can fight TV's fatigue problem, this conversation offers a practical framework for treating TV as a performance channel. Without further ado, let's dive in.
Hi, I'm David Murphy at Business of Apps, and today we're diving into a topic that a lot of app marketers have very strong opinions about: TV advertising. Now, most of you probably allocate the bulk of your budget to Meta and Google, and with good reason. But today we're going to challenge that instinct, not by abandoning it, but by showing you what happens when you apply a true performance lens to a channel that many app marketers have written off. I've got two great guests with me today. Mike Fogarty is head of client development at Tatari, a platform built specifically for buying and measuring TV. And Lauren Frame is director of growth and brand media at Greenlight, the family finance app. Welcome to both of you.
It's great to be here, David.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
So, Mike, tell us a little bit about Tatari to get us kicked off, please.
Yeah, sure. So, Mike Fogarty, head of client development at Tatari. Tatari is a platform that enables buying and measuring of what we call, David and Lauren, convergent TV, which is that intersection between streaming, linear, and online video. And we work with a handful of performance marketers that understand how to treat television from a real outcome and real KPI perspective, but how it benefits not just the bottom funnel, but actually fills the entire media mix of their integrated approach.
Good stuff. And Lauren, would you like to give us a quick intro to yourself and to Greenlight, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. But Lauren Frame, director of growth, marketing, and brand media at Greenlight FinTech, overseeing all of our brand and top of funnel channels. And Greenlight, if you're not aware, is a family finance and safety solution app. We started out as a debit card for kids, but we are rapidly growing into a broader, more holistic family management tool. We've got over 7 million parents and kids on the app, a 4.8 rating in the App Store, over 400,000 five-star reviews, and 95% of parents say Greenlight helps teach kids financial responsibility. So very excited to be representing Greenlight here today with Tatari.
Good stuff, and I'm very excited to speak to both of you. So, Mike, let's start with the bigger picture. TV is a massive and fragmented space. For app marketers who spend their lives in dashboards and CPAs, what does Tatari actually do, and what makes it different from just buying through a DSP?
Yeah, I love this question, David. And I'm going to go back to the notion of this convergence, which is our technology creates what we call kind of a unified command center that allows marketers like Lauren and Greenlight to stitch together that streaming, linear, and online video environment in a very fluid, orchestrated way. And sometimes I like to think about our own consumption habits. And when we think about how fragmented the TV landscape is today, it is in many cases becoming more complex, with more or less 50% of viewership being on streaming, 50% still remaining on a traditional broadcast cable environment. And so because there's still a substantial amount of viewership that's happening on the traditional side, it's important to, again, understand the intentional ways to buy. And that's exactly what our technology is enabling. And you have to maximize the glass or the full inventory landscape of TV. And this is where I think DSPs fall a little short. It's not that they aren't important, that they don't serve a practical purpose, but most DSPs are buying into only streaming, and they buy in a very small pocket because so much of streaming is actually still direct sold before it even actually hits the programmatic marketplace. And so the way that we view it is when you think about the need to have direct relationships for streaming direct, but also that linear side, that's what we've done, David, over the last 10 years is we've built that fidelity of direct relationships. And, at this point, we're working with over 300 brands, close to 100 agencies on also a self and a managed service basis. And what our teams are helping these partners do is get them into these big moments, whether it's sponsorships, in-show integrations, event tie-ins, and just the big tentpole moments, which, to speak kindly and candidly, just DSPs can't. That's not a point of access that they have. And so to kind of close out, we've had to build the technology to make it very familiar to digital marketers. And I think the key takeaway from what you heard just now from me is this notion of self-service activation. There are not many technology offerings in the space like Tatari that give you that true convergent self-service ability to buy across the glass.
Good stuff. And Lauren, Greenlight, I would say, is a great example of a performance-first app brand. Before you started working with Mike and Tatari, what did your marketing mix look like?
Yeah, so like a lot of growth marketers, right, we were incredibly heavy in Meta and Google, right? It's very familiar, it's very self-serve, it's a great launching point for new companies in general, and you just see the registration grow. But over time, we really saw that we were not growing as much as we wanted to, right? So we kind of tapped out that well, right? And our media mix was 90% between Google and Meta, right? That's it. 10% for testing some other things, but we were not really thinking about some of the other channels that provide more reach and frequency because they were scary to measure, frankly, right? You can't have the dotted line to exactly what you delivered. People were kind of scared to put the money in those places. But as we saw that we were reaching the same people over and over and over on Meta and Google, we really needed to think about how we broaden, right? How can we have, not diminishing returns? We were paying the same amount of money and more to reach the same people over and over again that weren't converting. So we really needed to diversify and find net new audiences. So we started working with Tatari back in 2022, and now linear is a massive part of our media mix, right? It's around, between linear and streaming, that accounts for at least a third, if not more, of our total media mix. So what we found is it really lifts everything else, right? So our media mix is a little bit more diversified than those just two channels I talked about, but we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit.
Good stuff. Now, I would say hindsight is a wonderful thing, and 4 years down the line, you've got a good story to tell. But what were your thoughts and your perceptions, your expectations going into this, Lauren? Because there is a perception that TV is for big established brands, not for growth app marketers watching their CACs.
Yeah, I think the company at large really had hesitations that TV was just more a little bit splashy, and you need these massive TV budgets. And how are we going to really measure all the attributable data, right? So the company at large, it took a lot of convincing to test into the space. And I think with Tatari, what was a big opening door was, one, you do not have to have these massive budgets to test into the space. And one thing that Mike said earlier that really stood out to me is Tatari's really built itself to lend itself to digital marketers, right? And that's true. And I started in digital marketing, and the way that they bring about the buying and how quickly you can do it and the measurement and the dashboard, it feels like a DSP sometimes, right? Like I can go into the dashboard and see everything happening in very, very quick real time. So that was something that I think helped go from a test to a always on evergreen part of our media mix, but not just because of the way that it is a little bit simpler to buy and you don't need massive budgets, but because we were seeing performance, right? We were seeing all other channels rise, right? And, that's something that it was a little bit harder at first to connect the measurability on that, right? Because it wasn't always correlated to TV, but when you're seeing everything else kind of come up at the same time, it was something that was obviously a no-brainer to us. So that's kind of, I would say, one thing that got us in and kind of where we're at now. When I think about the history from there till now, there's been a lot of trial and error and taking big swings and maybe making a couple mistakes, as everybody should, right? And we have really kind of gone up and down with what our TV spend and media mix look like and where the right place is for us, right? We, year one of being in television went in the Super Bowl, which, we did with Tatari. They got us some great rates, very last minute, bless. But we maybe as a brand, we're not quite ready for what is the actual KPI of Super Bowl, right? So that's something that, I think at large is getting us essentially to where we are now. But we kind of had to play a little bit in the waters.
Good stuff. And Mike, is that a story that resonates with you, with the brand coming in and they hear TV and they see Super Bowl?
Not with everybody, but it is a common thing that we see, honestly. And actually, to make it very endemic and relevant to what we were talking about before we started, David, FIFA and the World Cup. Obviously, these conversations started some time ago, not obviously imminently this close, because there would have obviously been sellout on these types of moments. But I think what brands are realizing, I think Lauren started to touch on that, is that you can really recognize television as this sustained evergreen channel. It doesn't have to be this one-time big swing transactional event. And I think it's because the infrastructure has matured around measurement, creative, which I know we're going to talk on a little later, automation and optimization. And that's just, again, things that we've built on our technology over the last 10 years to, I think, make marketers feel confidence and conviction in TV as a sustained channel, not just the big swing moment or that scale moment where brands eventually get to.
Good stuff. And I think, Lauren, it might be useful for people just starting to look at this, just to take a bit of a deeper dive into how your TV strategy has evolved since you first started looking at TV.
Yeah, so really, at first we looked at just linear, right? That's something that was a little bit more elusive to us, and we wanted to figure out how quickly do we see the results, right? So we started very small, went super, super big with Super Bowl, scaled back, right? Because Super Bowl is an amazing opportunity. I've actually worked on several Super Bowl campaigns, and it just has to be the right complete brand and company vision of what you're trying to achieve there, right? We were very much just trying to grow registrations and app downloads, and that is not an immediate lever for that desired outcome, right? So then we scaled back into a sense, and we wanted to look at what is the right frequency? What is the right reach? Where is our audience? What are they watching, right? How are they leaned in? When are they not leaned in? And so really we got back to a lot of testing. So ITN network broadcast, regional sports, syndication, and finding that right balance. Now today, I would say we are very much kind of thinking more holistically of how does streaming play into that, right? It is an overlap of cable, linear broadcast, streaming, OTT, CTV, you can throw all the words out there, right? And there is so many different ways to buy. I mean, TV is a very, very, very fragmented space, but by bringing TV and linear and streaming together, we're really thinking about how we're finding our audience and getting our ROI at large. And Tatari has been a great partner to kind of think about what is that overlap? What's the right way to get into the spaces? How does what you buy on linear pass through into streaming, right? So yeah, it's evolved, but we've definitely gotten to a great place.
Good stuff. Now, you both touched upon this idea of the fragmentation of the TV world and I guess the overarching split between linear and streaming. Mike, can I ask you, for a brand like Greenlight or for any other app marketer for that matter, any other app, does it matter? Can they not just pick one or the other and put all their sort of eggs in that basket?
You absolutely need to be integrated. And I'll kind of add some data points to punctuate that. So we can all agree that the data on streaming growth is striking. It's, according to Nielsen, more or less 47% of consumption. And where a lot of the growth is coming from is inside of two mechanisms. It's FAST, or free ad supported streaming TV apps like Tubi or the Roku channel. And then you have those AVOD, or advertising video on demand offerings. So that's your Disney Plus, Discovery Plus, Netflix light ad tiers. Everything with a plus these days is kind of where everybody's going. But the type of viewer that watches AVOD or FAST, or still as traditional pay TV, or what Lauren said, the virtuals of the YouTube TVs and Hulus, you don't necessarily have the same overlap and redundancy as you think. And I think that's when I think about mobile marketers or marketers at large, you have to be intentional. And A little hidden, I would say, not really widely known stat that Lauren and I actually both align on and we've talked about previously is it's not just viewership, David. It's actually where do the ads actually load and come from? And when you actually get to the data beneath it, majority of the ads today or share of voice or the opportunity for a Greenlight or any mobile marketer to engage with a household is traditionally still sitting on cable and broadcast. Upwards of 80% is still passing through from the traditional side into those free ad supported environments or those virtual environments, or, Lauren talked about it, the carriage pass-throughs is kind of what they're called in this notion. And so the mobile marketer and any marketer, again, has to be very mindful of that fluidity. And I talked about that orchestration earlier, because to me, if you're not doing that, David, as you astutely said, you are missing audiences. And so I get it. Like, people think of linear as the rural 55 plus viewer, and there may be validity to certain pockets there in terms of news or certain shows that are being watched there. But again, there's an intentionality to linear and there's an intentionality to streaming. And for me, David, I like to treat them as television. It's alt, sight, sound, and motion. And just like the open web, there are multiple places to engage and you have to be in multiple places at once. And that's how we think about it at Tatari.
Good stuff. Well, I confess I'm a few years over the age of 55, and I admit to watching Netflix, Amazon, BBC. So what you say rings very true with me. Lauren, how did everything that Mike's just talked about, how did that play out for Greenlight specifically?
Yeah, I just really love, again, what Mike is saying about, we think about it as TV, right? It's just all kind of one package. And that's kind of the evolution to where we are now. That's definitely where I come from in my background, right? And is a deep belief. But it takes time for, I would say, the media and marketing world, for everybody else to maybe get up to the same speed. And we have found some tests, right? We recently did a test with streaming, and we are working with Tatari and then additional measurement partners to look at, all the different angles that we can be measuring this, right? And one of them is incrementality. And when we ran the streaming test, on top of our normal linear, we found that there was only a 2% overlap, like less than 2%. 2%. I was actually surprised by that. Even and this was a recent test just a couple months ago, where, as someone that has a very strong background in TV, was kind of shocked to see that it was only 2%. And, it was one specific partner, but it was a very, very big partner. It was with Disney. And it was crazy to see that how incremental streaming was. And to that, it became a big unlock. And it really started immediately having more conversations of unlocking more streaming budget. Maybe these are audiences we're not reaching elsewhere. And, we've only been starting to grow from there in even the streaming space.
And talk to us about targeting when you're talking about streaming, Lauren. What additional opportunities does it open up?
Yeah, that's the beauty, I would say, of streaming. With linear, you're definitely more so buying day parts, channels, maybe age demo a bit, but it's a little more contextual, right? It's a little bit more alignment. It's not as rigorous as, you go into a Meta or Trade Desk and you're just cherry picking everything. With streaming, you can start cherry picking things, right? And that's also where you can see, okay, let's say we're buying a linear network that maybe is skewing a little bit older because of just natural, that's everyone's watching television. And we really want to go in a slightly younger demographic that is a true cord cutter or is not even engaging with maybe some of your traditional cable networks because they've grown up in this cord cutting time. You can target them with streaming, right? You can find them on many different streaming apps. There is so many different ones, but there's also a lot of targeting elements that you can do behind the scenes with streaming because it is a little bit more digital. So having that right balance just allows you to kind of plug any holes, find incremental audiences, and make it all work together. So audience targeting is very, very important to us because we are a parent-focused app, right? And we are very specific with our kids of parents that we focus on is really ages 7 to 15. So, we're not just targeting anybody and everybody of a certain age or gender. So having that audience layers and levers has been a big unlock for us as well with streaming.
Good stuff. Now, Mike, another thing to consider here is, people do what they're comfortable doing. One thing I hear from digital native marketers is that TV feels a bit intimidating to execute. It's unfamiliar to them. How do you address that?
Yeah, I would say that is a real barrier and definitely a real psychological challenge. And I think it comes more so from the traditional mindset versus more of the streaming entry point. But we'll kind of touch on this. But that's it. That's precisely what we tried to build at Tatari, David, is removing that cumbersome and monotonous friction or that antiquated way that people think about buying in the traditional way. And we made it more digital-like in nature. And so, we recognized 10 years ago where we started in linear first before we became more of a convergent kind of ecosystem, is we knew that VC funded brands or direct to consumer marketers or mobile app user acquisition marketers, they were naturally starting in Meta, Google, and Instagram and all the places that Lauren and Greenlight did. But at some point their funnel got started and they had to accelerate somewhere else. And for us, we had to create a crosswalk, if you will, into Tatari that felt more like paid search and paid social, digital-like friendly advertising. So we made it easy for them to get on the glass and to navigate what was that very cumbersome, highly manual, highly friction way to buy traditional cable broadcast. And so we've changed that.
And I can concur, it was very, very, very challenging for a while.
Indeed. And I think a lot has changed because, especially in the linear side, not just streaming, it's become more curated and biddable and fungible in that way. We've really leaned into Tatari, into the nature of AI-powered planning and machine learning, which is this ability to look at historical data to understand predicted performance on app downloads, cost per visitor, CPA, and ROAS, but also from a predicted clearance perspective. And again, like David, a lot of the same levers that you're going to experience in a Google or a Meta or those types of environments. And doubling down on the kind of AI element again, a lot of people kind of throw out AI kind of very liberally. And I think on one side of AI, there's the automation or the agents, right? A buyer or a seller agents that a lot of people are talking about and how those communicate. And that's one side of it, which is more automation. But I really think where the magic happens is the intelligence, or that is the raw, language machine learning ability, where it's more of the predictive element. And that's where Tatari has really leveraged a lot of our 10 years of history and billions through our technology, David, to inform that for marketers like Greenlight, where we help them understand the right places to buy, the right curated inventory, the right way to optimize in real time, even on linear, which I think is important because, again, that's not a known way to buy linear today. A lot are still doing it, as Lauren can attest to, having lived this in her past, very manually. And I guess the final side of it is I touched earlier on the nature of how we're different, David. You asked the question. It's the direct nature of our relationships. And so because we have built these direct connections into networks over the last 10 years, we understand the right pricing to enter, when to buy direct, when to buy through programmatic activation. How do you measure it in a very different way? Because you have to treat linear and streaming in very different ecosystems because one is probabilistic and one is deterministic. And so that's where we've helped, David, to bring this to a close, is you no longer have to feel isolated on a nomad journey by yourself, right? You don't have to build and own all these different licenses in disparate ways. We've helped you build it from scratch because we're a one-stop shop for everything across the ecosystem.
Good stuff. Now, you mentioned a word there, Mike, that will be ringing in the ears of most app marketers: measurement. They like to know that if they're going to try something new, what proof do we have that it works? So, Lauren, you've been there, done this, bought a T-shirt. What have you actually seen in terms of measurable impact?
Yeah. So it's really important to think about that the media mix at large is the most, important thing to think about, right? And it should not be seen as a silo. And I think that that's a common mistake. And I think even Greenlight kind of started here, where every channel sits in its own silo, right? And you're monitoring your own individual performance and what am I delivering and what is this channel doing for the business to try and, defend your ROI and get budgets, right, unlocked. But when you look at the whole picture and you kind of like open up the silo doors and everybody can look at each other and talk to each other, we really saw that the media mix was impacted and lifted with TV on, like very clear in a sense, right? We saw a positive impact on AdWord quality scores, increased social media retargeting pools. We had higher click-through rates, and we had a lift in brand awareness, right? And when we saw that lift in brand awareness, then we would see our family registration and app downloads also be growing at the same time. So it's definitely something that is grown in our efficiency. It is very important for our digital channels. I'm very close with my digital counterpart that runs Meta and Google, and we're talking every single day of, hey, we're seeing, a lot more retargeting going on, or hey, we're seeing our regs drop on Meta. What are you doing in TV? Like that's the first thing they ask is what are you doing on TV that might be impacting my channels? So it's definitely something that is, it's not just on its own. And it is also, adding incremental reach for everything. So it all works as an ecosystem.
And Mike, from your perspective, it sounds like a bit of an all boats rise sort of scenario where the impact is being felt cross-channel, across multiple channels. How do you measure that?
Yeah, so I will definitely totally agree with Lauren. Television being sight-side emotion has a lot of halo effect, but you have to measure it differently, as I kind of foreshadowed, because we buy in different ways at Tatari. So it's kind of a multi-layered approach. But for the sake of simplicity, a lot of what we do at Tatari, as Lauren knows firsthand on linear, is based on incrementality. And we look at that in two ways. One is what we call dynamic baseline lift modeling, or what is essentially a spike analysis over a baseline. So, did we air our 15s and 30s? And what did Lauren and Greenlight see immediately from causality on their website behavior? But we know that, as Lauren articulated, that it's not just the immediate nail driver, but what's the halo? How does it rise other tides? And so we have to use a lot of, in linear at least, automatic content recognition or ACR-based data to understand what we call the drag factor effect of linear. Streaming is more endemically easier to understand because you get a lot of IP passback. It's much more rooted and anchored in a deterministic ID. And so we can do a lot more of synthetic holdouts and test and controls there to help you understand the incremental lift of introducing television. But more endemically, Dave, what we're here to talk about, right, from a mobile marketer and a UA perspective is, we're very deeply integrated into all the major measurement mobile providers. So your AppsFlyers, Adjust, Kachava, Singular, and Branch. And so we can directly take app downloads and all the event data and actually directly correlate and tie that back to your TV spots and campaigns. So I think that's a very critical factor. But, what we've recognized, and I think we've grown at Tatari, and Lauren, I think, is going to touch on this, is we are also very pro interoperability, David. As much as we stand behind our conviction and our proprietary measurement that's been objectively validated, I recognize that from a mobile perspective or from a performance marketer standpoint, you're going to have your in-house data. You might have your third-party MMM source of truth. And we play very nice with those partners because we want you guys to feel your source of truth as much as validating against our incrementality and outcome data. So again, for me, that's a really important thing, David. We have our own in-house measurement, but we also want to make sure we're sending data to your source of truth and validating against your own data.
Yeah, double click on that, where they do work really well with others in a sense, where, I've worked with many companies that it's, well, our data says XYZ, so like that's the truth. And my team at Tatari has been wonderful of understanding all the different boxes that we're working in and problem solve. So I just wanted to really double down on that, Mike, that it's true from a client side. And I am someone that is always subjective of people grading their own homework.
And what does that third-party stack look like for Greenlight, Lauren?
Yeah, great question. So we layer in Rockerbox for MTA, multi-touch attribution. We also work with iSpot for creative insights and audience tracking and overlap. And then we work with Kantar for brand awareness by individual channel, which is very fun, right? So you can look at high level, hey, what's TV doing for brand awareness? But you can look at the levels of what type of brand awareness is Fox driving versus HGTV versus Netflix, like at that granular level with Kantar. And then we combine that with Tatari's attribution, right? So we have those 4 data sources. We're also onboarding mixed media modeling right now as well to give us a 5th layer. And this gives us so much confidence because all of those things working together, right, provide a bigger picture. And I think that's really, really important because, we actually just onboarded iSpot earlier this year, and it is a creative insight and audience kind of tool in a sense where we actually get feedback on our creative. Do people like it? What other thoughts are they having? Did they hate our ad? And that's something that, Tatari can give us the data behind, but sometimes you need that just additional context to find the why. So we think of them as, one is you have your certain source of truth for each piece of measurement, but not being blind to just one source, but making sure everything's playing well together. Real data nerd over here.
So, Mike, Lawrence talks about incrementality data giving the confidence, the conviction to expand streaming. Could you just explain what that test looks like in a little bit more detail, please?
Yeah, it's very important. So, we talked earlier about Tatari is very leaning into incrementality, and in some cases, you can do that natively without a geo holdout. But in many cases, it's quite common to do that, especially for brick and mortar retail, because it's an easier way for them to validate it. And so for those that just might not be as familiar with what a kind of geographic based incremental holdout is, it's effectively a structured experiment where you have a test design of DMAs where media is, of course, exposed, and control DMAs where it is not exposed. And I think, with Greenlight and certain ways to do it, in the control side, you can kind of take these synthetic clusters of DMAs and almost also get a readout on what the test design would have looked like had that not been exposed to ads. And so it's nice because it can really isolate media impact, David, without the user tracking level, which means it can open up on linear streaming and online video. And then, clients like Greenlight can use first party data to validate that, to really feel that, kind of proof of performance. And Lauren, you ran this at Greenlight with a streaming publisher, and I think you're going to share some of the results you saw.
Yeah, and I just want to if anyone takes anything away from this, it should be writing down your homework. Geo-based incrementality tests are just very, very important to be doing right now. We have so many lined up right now. We have a calendar of all the geo tests we have going on at one point, because it basically removes any direct measurement in a sense, and it's just looking at control, exposed, lift, right, by region, right? If you add this in, what happens? If you remove it, what happens? So we recently did a test, because we always have incrementality tests running, and we saw a lift in parent registrations during the test period when we ran Disney streaming, which makes sense, right? But when we'd ran Disney in the past, our CAC on it, right, our cost per acquisition was really high. And it had kind of given leadership a little bit of pause on maybe investing in that specific streaming partner. But we're a parent-focused app. Come on, kids are watching Disney, right? But really what we saw, again, so doing the incrementality test gave us a better insight into the true impact that was happening, because our CAC, reported CAC, was a little bit higher because it wasn't able to capture a lot of the impact happening to, let's say, Meta, right? And that's where we saw this massive kind of eye-opening data in terms of, wow, the regions that we tested streaming in had such a higher lift, right? And also Meta performed better and Google performed better. And after the cooldown period, we even saw registrations actually still climb for an incremental period. And that's kind of that halo effect that Mike was referring to. Eventually, the halo won't last forever, but it is one of those things where the halo effect is available because they're seeing the ads, you turn it off. Now they're getting retargeting. Now they are getting, the Meta ads, et cetera. So it's really about, totally seeing that picture. And that's what geo incrementality unlocks. So we saw that, our FTA and LTA ratio came in almost 5 times versus just 1.1 for linear, meaning streaming is bringing in a much higher portion of our first touch new to brand customers. And FTA, let me just clarify, is first touch attribution. So that was the biggest metric we saw move as well, is wow, this is the first time someone's hearing about us, right? We're not able to find those customers maybe just on Meta and Google that we've never touched before, but once we've given them that touch point, we're able to find them elsewhere. And so we had the halo impact. We saw Meta went up with our reach in those regions, up 4%, traffic 8%, funnel starts 10. And that's just on Meta, right? That was something that we never could have seen before without the incrementality test, because otherwise Meta would just look like it's doing a really good job. And this way we were like, wow, that is because of the halo impact of TV. So, want to make sure I hand the mic back, but I think it's geo-testing, incrementality, streaming, whether it's linear, is super important because it gives you a much bigger picture of how this impacts your business and how it should come into play.
Good stuff. Well, don't hand the mic back just yet, Lauren, because my next question's for you as well. Big thing at the moment, using AI to produce commercials. You've done this recently. What was behind that decision?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? I think it's everybody in marketing right now, I guess in any industry, is facing the sprint to AI. how are we using it? Use it. It's trendy. Just you figure it out, right? And so one of the areas that was a clear benefit for us as a company was, I'm going to be careful how I say this, right? Because it is in the creative side. However, we still much value creatives, right? Writers, editors, all of those things. But what AI unlocked for us was concepts and ideas that we could only ever dream about, right? So, you think of commercials and think of like the craziest commercial you've ever seen before AI, and how did they make that happen, right? It's either a crazy, crazy, crazy high budget, a lot of editing, a lot of CGI, etc. But now we're able to do that with AI, right? And quickly and efficiently. And so we took an approach of, we may not have the most massive creative budget in the world. How, though, can this be a tool to help us scale, especially in the commercial side, right? Like TV video, that's the most expensive production there is. But we also wanted to have some like ethics and standards behind how we're using it, right? One thing that we really stood behind as a company was, as a product that's talking to parents, and oftentimes we feature children, whether they're actors or real customer testimonials in our creative, we never wanted to replace kids, real kids with AI, right? We wanted to allow this to be an area that expands on maybe what kids are dreaming or wishing or, thinking about, in a sense that we could just never make in your normal production shoot. So we recently launched a Peter Pan spot that is, Peter Pan is it's not publicly trademarked, by the way. Just want to call that out. But how it is a child dreaming about, Peter Pan is essentially thinking about how he has more freedom and to manage the Lost Boys by having some financial education. And whether that's, collecting his gold or saving for a ship, it is something that made it very accessible for us. But we really wanted to make sure that when we use it in the future, that we are not just replacing it with actual people or children, those types of things. So we just launched this recently.
Good stuff. And Mike, from where you're sitting, have you seen any evidence that AI-produced creative performs any better, any worse, about the same as normal creative?
Yeah, and so I think what you're referencing, David, and what Lauren kind of shared, I'm interested to see how that creative is going to perform with us, because we allow partners to do a lot of A/B testing to get pretty granular and rigorous perspective on what's working and not. So we'll know soon for Greenlight. But look, I think it's an industry-wide trend. I think a lot of people are leaning into it. Lauren hit a lot of key fundamentals, and I guess the way we view it is, to me, it's much more about the quality of the concept, not the production method necessarily. And I do encourage testing. I think people should absolutely lean into this, because there's two kind of critical issues, and Lauren can underscore these and tell me if she agrees. But you have very real creative fatigue in television, just like any other channel. And so I think because some of the more like professionally produced content, again, still very valid today and still very impactful today, it just can take time. And then it's then how many iterations can you get out quick? And so AI is lowering the barrier and the speed to enter, because the variations and the iterations that it can produce very quickly is palatable. I mean, you can definitely substantiate and feel that. And so again, to me, it's like, if you have the right kind of, high quality, good audio, verified creative, very kind of distinct call to action and brand equity, very consistent recognition throughout the creative, yeah, I absolutely think it can perform against a professionally produced model. But yeah, again, encourage testing is the takeaway.
Lauren, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think fatigue, like Mike mentioned, is something that really stood out to me in kind of the conversation with creative production, television. It's almost like raise your hand if you've seen an ad that you're so sick of seeing, right? And what's very interesting is, and this is very recently, we, at Greenlight, we're running, hundreds, thousands of different creative versions on digital, right? In terms of Meta and Google and social, where you can flip something really quickly, whether it's static or GIF style or carousel. And we found that by doing that, we were seeing more, efficiencies. On the flip side, we had the same creative and market for 2 years for television, right? Because of, it's just a little bit harder to do full audio, full sound, that's TV ready, that's going to look good on a large screen picture. So this is now kind of, we're moving into that world where we expect ourselves to have as a brand, but also consumers should as well. We shouldn't be fatiguing ourselves with creative messaging just because we don't have a production budget or we can't shoot a new concept every quarter. So we're now kind of moving into the space of having new creative and new messaging in TV much more frequently than we ever have before.
Good stuff. We've covered a load of ground. I just want to sort of bring this home now by asking both of you. I'll start with you, Lauren. For the performance marketer, listen to all this who's still a little bit on the fence about TV and testing TV. What's your honest advice?
Yeah, I think, again, I started as a digital marketer. I just want to call that out. And I have worked on linear and the big, scary, submit your orders and your specs and goals and all of those things. So it's like take away some of the old ideas around television, define your plan, set clear goals, and do all of that before you spend $1, right? What is your expected outcomes? What are your hypotheses? Define all of that, right? Even if you're just looking to test. And you do not need a massive budget. You can go in with test budgets that are palpable, that you are willing to, lay down your line on of, hey, I think this is an area that's going to unlock. So small budgets are totally fine. And really thinking about, lastly, is that it's very measurable. It really is. And working with Tatari has really unlocked a lot of that measurability. If you like dashboards and looking at real-time results, you're going to get that. And you will be surprised at how much data you are actually able to get. I think really understanding all the different methodologies of how we measure TV, linear versus streaming, looking at the day logs versus the digital data, it's very, very measurable. So just don't forget that. And last thing I'll say is TV doesn't work by itself. Don't just turn TV on without other things going on to think that it's going to do, everything that you've hoped and dreamed before. It is a part of a media mix. It is an ecosystem. And today we really have to think how to find people outside of just the easy digital places to go, because consumer habits are changing all the time. So TV is definitely a lever that I would say everybody should be using, truly, and it is not have to be so scary to get into. And a lot of thanks to Tatari on that.
Good stuff. Mike, what about you?
So I'll kind of double down on two things. I think, again, thinking about addressable audiences and the intentionality of being present on streaming, which again commands 47% and is rapidly growing, but understanding that there is still the other side of the aisle that is still very relevant today. And there are very specific ways that you can address to make sure you're maximizing, the whole. And it's not a question, David and Lauren, anymore about does TV work? I think people feel the conviction. It's more about how can you close the gap more quickly. So Lauren, you double down on it, right? It's like set a design experiment, trust your KPIs, wait for the data. But that kind of is my final thing, David. I have to call for patience. I think it's very important to exhibit patience with television. Lauren said it. You need to have support pre, during, and post. Give some time to understand results before reacting too quickly, because again, I think people want to make television specifically connected look and feel like Meta and Google. And as much as we can, I want to take a step back and remind everyone on this conversation that it's still television today. And television does many things well. We need to treat it sometimes as a traditional channel, not just a digital like one.
Good stuff. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, Mike and Lauren. Thank you both very much for pulling back the curtain on the Greenlight playbook and for walking us through what modern TV advertising actually looks like for performance marketers. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Tatari, check out their mobile app acquisition guide. And if you're a growth marketer at an app company thinking about TV for the first time, hopefully today has given you a clear framework for where to start. So that's all for today. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye.
And that was the episode 269, the Performance Channel App Marketers Wrote Off, featuring the App Talk interview with Mike Fogarty, Head of Client Development at Tatari, and Lauren Frame, Director of Growth and Brand Media at Greenlight. To listen to more episodes, by now we have more than 250 to check out. Subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps, and you will find us easily. Remember, we release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you will be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.